Hello, human geographers. We are back at it again this evening. Tonight, we begin our political geography unit. The basic unit on the modern political map is known as a state, which is a politically organized territory that is administered by a sovereign government and is recognized by a significant portion of the international community. A state has a defined territory, a permanent population, a government, and is recognized by other states. States are created by humans as a way to organize and manage one another. A state is the largest current political unit, and it's really just a formal term for country. There are other smaller political units like provinces, counties, or municipalities. And as the definition above mentions, there are 4 characteristics that every state must have. They need to have a defined territory, a permanent population, a government that maintains control over its domestic and international affairs, and is recognized by other countries. And that recognition by other states serves as a form of legitimacy and can come in many different forms, like establishing diplomatic relations, sending and receiving ambassadors, establishing embassies, or signing treaties between those 2 states. So how many states are there in the world? Well, the number varies depending on which government you're asking. A good place to start, though, is the United Nations. The United Nations recognizes 195 members as sovereign, independent states. If a country has been admitted as a member of the United Nations, it's a safe claim that they have the recognition of the rest of the world. And so there are 195 countries that have received that recognition. That's risen from 50 in the 1940s when the UN was first created. So what do you notice on this graphic? Jot down some observations, maybe some questions that you have. But there are other indicators that states functionally need. For example, a state can't practically exist if it doesn't have an organized economy. Now, whether that is a highly globalized, interconnected economy or a simple barter system may vary state by state, but realistically, it needs to have an economy. A term that is often mistakenly used with state is nation. But they are distinctly different concepts. A nation is a tightly knit group of people possessing bonds of language, ethnicity, religion, and other shared cultural attributes. Pretty much every definition of the term nation is going to focus on the cultural aspect of the group. So a state or country is a political term, whereas a nation is a cultural term. And the tightly knit nature of the nation helps to form a common identity, a shared language or religion, a common historical legacy helps to hold the nation together. Both nations and states have distinct territory, but states will have clearly defined boundaries, while a nation's boundaries tend to be more variable. To illustrate this difference, let's look at the number of states versus the number of nations in the world. Obviously, the number of states varies based on the recognition of others, but the number sits at approximately 200 states in the world. But even conservative estimates of the number of nations, of cultural groups, has it at significantly higher number, with nearly 4,000 to 5,000 nations that exist today. For example, multiple nations exist within the single state of the United States of America. Native Hawaiians and the Navajo Nation are two prominent examples. But the US government recognizes 573 native or tribal nations just within one country. So simply stated, a nation refers to a group of people with a shared culture, and a state refers to a political unit synonymous with country. So the second half of our lecture tonight will look at a variety of combinations of the cultural concept of nations with the political units of states. And so we begin with a nation state, which is a state whose territory is identical to that occupied by a single particular ethnic group or nation. And I think it would be helpful to add an additional definition at this time from a different unit of the AP Human Geography curriculum. Ethnicity is identity with a group of people that share a common ancestry and culture. So the concept of a nation is built upon common cultural features like language, religion, and ethnicity. As a result, some political geographers refer to nation states as ideal in terms of its political and cultural overlap. So a nation state is a country, a political unit with a nearly homogeneous culture. In a nation state, nearly everyone identifies with the same ethnicity, speaks the same language, or practices the same religion, and often all three. So Iceland is 93% Icelandic. Scandinavians settled the island which had no indigenous population, and there hasn't been much in-migration to diversify the island. But the reality is that there are no perfect nation states. Every state is home to at least some small ethnic group or cultural minority. The Japanese nation accounts for 98% of the total population of Japan's 128 million permanent residents. But the Ainu people represent an ethnic minority within Japan. However, Japan is still considered a nation state because its cultural makeup is almost entirely one nation. Portugal and Egypt are nearly entirely Portuguese and Egyptian, respectively. Lesotho is another nation-state example because 99.7% of its population is Sotho. Countries like Germany, Sweden, Greece, Estonia, Iran, Albania, Croatia, Poland, and Armenia are just a few other examples of nation-states. These peoples have long histories of occupying the land, speaking the same language, practicing the same religion, and following the same cultural customs. To finish up tonight, we're going to look at a variety of combinations of nations and states. Really pay attention to terms because they describe the political and cultural makeup of these states. A multi-state nation is a nation that stretches across borders and across states. So this is a single cultural group that extends across multiple states. So a group of people who share a cultural or ethnic background but live in more than one country. Ethnic Russians are an example because they have considerable population numbers outside the state of Russia. As we have seen recently in Ukraine, which contains a significant ethnic Russian population, multi-state nations can pose challenges to political borders. the Korean nation, or the Irish nation extend across multiple states. But what's interesting is that because those nations extend across multiple states, when we take those states individually, like South Korea or the Republic of Ireland, those individual countries are typically classified as nation states, as you can see on the data on this slide. So South Korea and the Republic of Ireland are considered nation states, even though they have national groups that extend beyond those respective political boundaries. A multinational state is a state that contains two or more ethnic groups with traditions of self-determination that agree to coexist peacefully by recognizing each other as distinct nationalities. So this is a single country that contains multiple nations. Canada is a multinational state because it is bilingual with both English and French, with most French speakers living in the province of Quebec. There are also separate ethnicities that identify as distinctly different nations, particularly the Quebecois and the First Nations, the indigenous population of Canada. The United Kingdom is another great example. This is a single state, but with 4 nations: the English, Welsh, Scottish, and Irish nations. The Irish are physically fragmented and occupy the northern part of the island of Ireland. In Europe, Spain includes several nations, but more notable for their desire for independence are the Basque and the Catalan people. And that is a major challenge for multinational states, is creating a sense of unity amongst different people. Canada, the United Kingdom, and Spain have all granted greater autonomy to their notable nations while remaining a unified country. But not all multinational states are able to manage this. When the cultural differences prove too irreconcilable, multinational states may break up, as we have seen with Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union in the 1990s. The US has been largely successful at integrating different cultural groups into a single American nation, but with distinctly different ethnicities. As a result, there's a debate about whether the US should be classified as a nation state, a multinational state, or some other more broad term like a multi-ethnic state. A stateless nation is a nation that does not have a state. So a stateless nation is a group of people united by culture, language, history, and tradition that do not have their own political territory. And there are far more nations than states, so many nations don't have a state of their own. The largest stateless nation are the Kurdish people, with between 25 and 30 million people without a state of their own. The Kurds are spread across 6 states in Southwest Asia, primarily in Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, but with smaller numbers in Azerbaijan as well as Armenia. Other examples of stateless nations seeking to become independent states include the Palestinians, who live primarily in the Gaza Strip and West Bank territories near Israel, and the Basque and Catalan people in northern Spain. It is worth noting as an endpoint that globalization, especially the establishment of rapid global communications, has drawn greater awareness and attention to once isolated and voiceless stateless nations. It remains to be seen how the political map will evolve in the coming years and decades. Our final designation isn't a type of state. They are not countries, but instead regions within countries. Autonomous and semi-autonomous regions have some authority to govern their own territories independently from the government of the state they reside in. Russia has the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, while China has several autonomous regions, including Hong Kong. Native American reservations, like the Navajo Nation, as well as Alaskan Natives and Hawaiian homelands within the United States, serve as semi-autonomous regions within the U.S. federal government. Residents of reservations are citizens of the United States and must abide by federal laws. But these regions are separate legal entities and are allowed a measure of self-rule. This is why several Native American reservations have established gambling casinos, even though the U.S. state they reside in may outlaw gambling. The Canadian government created the new territory of Nunavut in order to give the Inuit, the indigenous First Nations group that occupies the territory, the ability to maintain their culture and make decisions that they feel are best for themselves and their land. But autonomous and semi-autonomous regions have limited authority, which is a topic that we will be exploring in future lectures. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you back in class.